In the Fibre Channel SAN world, we've historically divided switching products into two categories: director class switches and workgroup class switches. However, there's actually no formal definition of a director or a workgroup switch, not even on the SNIA website, and to be honest, most people just refer to both types as switches. After all, at their core, no pun intended, they're essentially the same: physical network switches that forward fibre channel frames. They're the glue that connects hosts to storage. Multiple switches that are linked together merge and form a common fabric and offer a set of fabric services that simplify management of the SAN and enable SAN scalability. Anyway, just in case you ever do need to know the differences between a director and a switch, and remember there's no official term, the two major differences are: firstly, directors have more ports than workgroup switches. It should be pretty clear to see which of the two images on the slide is the director. The one we have on the slide is a Brocade DCX director class switch, and it can have over 380 ports. Secondly, and of more importance, is that director switches tend to be the ultimate in terms of high availability. Just about everything in them is redundant. Redundant power supplies, fans, management interfaces, firmware, control processors, just about everything you can think of. And mentioning redundant control processors, director class switches have two control processors that run in active-passive mode, with one active and the other ready and waiting to take over in the event that the active processor fails, enabling the entire director to remain up and running even if a control processor fails. And last but not least, directors are obviously a lot more expensive than workgroup switches. Now then, fundamental to all switches, director class or workgroup class, are switch ports. As with HBA ports that we already discussed, switch ports accept SFP transceiver modules, which can be either optical or electrical and can take SC or LC connections. In all honesty, in over 10 years of storage, I don't think I've ever seen copper fibre channel cabling. It's always fibre with optical SFPs. These SFP modules can also be of varying speeds, with 8 gigabits per second and 16 gigabits per second being popular at the moment. And it's possible to configure an 8 or a 16 gigabits per second port down to slower speeds. For example, an 8 gig port might be configured down to 2 gig if required. And this brings us to an important topic: whether we hardcode port speed or we configure them for auto-negotiate. And auto-negotiate is where we let the switch port and the end port, the host HBA port or storage array port usually, decide between themselves which speed to operate at. Now then, the principle behind auto-negotiate is sound, and most of the time it does work, with the devices at each end of the cable negotiating the same speed and the highest possible common speed. For example, if a host HBA supports 16 gigabits per second, but the switch port it's connected to only supports 8 gigabits per second, the highest speed that they can negotiate is 8 gigabits per second. And like I said, this works 99% of the time, but it's that 1% of the time when it doesn't work that causes you the headache. And for this reason, a lot of people choose to hardcode their port speed. And as well as port speed, each port in a switch can operate in one of a few modes. We'll list 4 possible port modes on the screen. What we'll do is, we'll go through some pictures to explain the concepts behind the different port types. But before we switch slides and do this, it's important to know that all ports in a switch start out as generic ports, G ports. And G ports can automatically determine which mode to configure themselves into, depending on the type of device that's attached to the other end of the cable. So let's switch slides and go through the different port types.